Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Future of Impact. I am very excited to have my friend and our guest for today's show, Glenn Jenkins. He is the outgoing executive director of Embrace Kids, and he's filled with all sorts of amazing insights and knowledge and value that we're going to talk about today. But first, let me welcome you, Glenn. Thank you so much for being a guest on the show.
Thank you so much for having me today.
And I would love just to kind of start. I always think it's really interesting to hear someone's path to how they got to where they're at today, because I have found in all of my experience that it is never a straight line. So if you would be so kind as to kind of just share like whatever highlights of the story you want to share of like how you got to today.
Sure. I think with nonprofit, it is so rarely a straight line because there's not a structured career track. People aren't going to college for nonprofit. They're not getting a degree, in nonprofit. It's not that type of work or industry. So yes, things happen circuitously. For myself, I got my MBA from University of Miami and then returned back to New Jersey, went into sales and sales management. And then the person that I worked for was one of the founding board members of Embrace Kids Foundation. He asked me to start helping him run a couple of fundraising events and to develop a relationship with Rutgers University because I had gone there and had a lot of ties to the Greek system. After working for him and volunteering for him for 2 years, one day he called me into his office and said, "I have a new plan for you. You're going to run my nonprofit." I said, "Well, what? I haven't really, done this before besides the volunteer work for you." And he just kind of nonchalantly said, "Well, I've decided this. You're going to think about it. And then I know you're going to call me tomorrow morning and tell me you want to do it." I said, Okay." I left his office. I thought about it. I woke up the next morning, I called him and I told him I would like to do it. And 21 years later, here we are.
That's amazing. He manifested you. He told you I'm gonna make this a reality. I love that. So that's a great segue into kind of like the first thing I'd love for us to talk about, which is just this idea of when you started, it was obviously more of kind of what we would consider a startup organization, and then 21 years later to where it is today. That journey is something that I think is really interesting in this space of, so many nonprofits pop up on a daily basis based on things that are going on in the world and causes that people care about. And that idea of kind of like where it started out, and then maybe the trials and tribulations, however you want to position it, of coming in at the ground of a startup impact organization and scaling it to where it is today. If you can kind of take us through that journey, I would love to hear about it.
Sure. So Embrace Kids started, I would say mom and pop. I mean, as small as you could, in that they had bake sales in the hospital to provide rolls of quarters for laundry and for telephone booths, okay, for payphones. This is in the early 90s. And over time, the group developed from just being a couple parents and a nurse to recruiting a very successful local restaurant owner, some other business people. And so the group in the first couple of years was very small. And then the business people came in and immediately were able to put their network and their own life experience and expertise to work for fundraising and just running the operations. So I'd say the first 5 years, and I was not there yet. Race Kids just celebrated a 30th anniversary. The first 5 years, it was very small and modest. And then when this business contingent came in, that was when things really started to pick up. And there was fundraising events, and you actually had donors. And so that was then the early phases of me being involved. We had a walk that at that time we built up to $100,000 net walk. That was a quarter of the whole budget when I became director. And so from this very mom and pop, modest background, myself and then the business crew on the board, we started being more sophisticated in terms of networking, in terms of operations, really just building bridges, relationships to every single person that we could. But what I'll tell you is while we were looking to build the organization, there was a lot of challenges. There was strife. There was strife between the very early founders and then the business contingent that came in. And then also there was this other odd, almost destructive divide between the business and fundraising element in the group and then the parents and program part of the nonprofit. When I got there, those two were in a low level war of attrition between at the board level, the event level, and it was something that was very negative for the organization and also something that could not go on. It really was the sort of thing that was toxic, and it started to be such a distraction that it needed to be resolved. And so what did happen with our group was that the business contingent really did take over the organization. There was people who left with some hurt feelings, certainly some strife, tough words between people. But what came out of it was best. What came out of it was more of a structured, focused, more successful organization. So the first 10 years, had some real great stories, but then it also had some tough moments with these people clashing, including one of the couples had lost their child to cancer. I don't know about you. I don't ever want the karma in life to have strife with parents who have lost a child. That's just not where I want to be
Yeah.
in the cosmic karma scheme. So there was a big resettlement. And then when I became the director, that was then when things were resolved, we could move forward. What we then did was recruit new parents to be on the board, and there was an integration. So instead of two factions, we moved within a couple of years to have a fully integrated board and organization where those different perspectives respected each other and actually grew to appreciate each other, because each group really needed the other to be successful, to fulfill the mission, to help these, wonderful kids.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like that right there in the, a huge piece of value to take away is this idea of integrating, kind of both sides of the business, if it were. We've spoken a lot about that in kind of the challenges that, leaders of nonprofits face, in that there are two different, in a for-profit business, it's kind of like everybody's serving the same group, right? Like the consumer uses their dollar to decide and create market and competition and innovation, and all of that for supply and demand of what you're selling. But in the nonprofit space, the people who are buying what you're selling is not the same people that you're delivering the product or service to, right? Like the community you're serving. So this idea of integrating that those two sides to make it one cohesive, machine, I think is not only key and an imperative to success, but I think also, a good way of kind of looking at and taking some insights from. If you can just touch really quickly on, to make sure we're grounded in like the original mission and the original community that was served, because I think in the story of Embrace Kids, one of the key, from my point of view, keys to success is that has always been like locked in what the mission is, who you serve, and in all the trials and tribulations and growth, growing pains and successes, it's always because that seems to be the core of what everybody keeps their focus on.
Sure. So Embrace Kids' mission is to support families whose kids have cancer, sickle cell, and some other real tough catastrophic and chronic illnesses. It's non-medical support. We're attached to a great medical program. This organization was founded to support non-medical needs. And then how was that done? Financial aid, direct financial aid to families, educational support. Kids would get teaching or tutoring at the clinic and hospital every single day. Social services and counseling, those were provided via grant funding to the medical school that we were attached to. And then events, not fundraising events, but really fun, dynamic events that make the kids feel great, feel like heroes, feel like champions, feel special in terms of how grand that these events were. But then also the events fulfilled another great goal, which was a support group for the parents and the adults. They would all be at a function. They would see their kids happy right away. The parents are happy. But then these big events with hundreds of people enabled parents to meet other parents that are going through an otherwise very unique and tough life situation. And so over time, I say parents, but it's also really grandparents and aunts and uncles, but the family, the adults could connect, socialize, and chat at these incredible events while their kids were having fun. So I always talk to people about the meaning of these, we call them inspirational events, okay, for the kids, that there's so much more meaning to them besides a holiday party with gifts or besides Halloween with candy and costumes, that you're giving people community, you're giving adults community through these events in a very natural way for them to get together. So those are really the four pillars of what Embrace Kids does. And then to get back to your point about the organization, the mission, and board, by focusing on the mission solely, that was what enabled an integration of these two groups. And then over time, it actually became very clear and easy to make decisions for the organization, myself and the board, because you have this litmus test. Is this bettering the patient families as per our mission and core programs? And that's a litmus test where you really have a yes or no. And then also the focus on that really helped check any ego at the door by board members.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, I think that like clarity of mission, especially for an organization that's been around for so long, keeping that focus, we find often, or not often, but sometimes in some cases, that organizations kind of like lose that, the programming side stays committed to a mission, the board and the kind of fundraising side, it like starts to be a split between like, what are we really focused on here? So I think this like kind of always keeping it back and bringing it back to this litmus test is a great, is a very valuable insight, I think, for anybody who's listening here that's leading an organization or maybe having challenges. Like what's one of the number one things you hear from all organizations is challenges between board and the kind of fundraising side and the programming side. I would love for you to speak a little bit about, like, you guys have just done, you were just talking a lot about the programming and kind of how you've innovated or kind of evolved the programming over the years and grown it as the organization has grown. I'd love to hear a little bit about how innovation kind of drives the evolution of programming, as well as how that plays out in fundraising and partnerships. You guys have just done some really unique things that really aren't like these groundbreaking, oh my God, we couldn't think of it, but it's like, you're just so in tune with the community around you and the community you serve and, kind of keeping everyone together. If you could touch on some of those, I think that'd be great to hear.
Sure. So I think that we realized I realized early, about 20 years ago, that there are so many different people and groups that could play a role in supporting the patient families. So it takes community, and then what does community mean? Besides family, it means um, friends, school, faith-based organizations, then also for Embrace Kids, our local university. Embrace Kids is based in New Brunswick, New Jersey, which is where New Jersey's flagship public university, Rutgers University, is based. The whole reason that I think I was hired as the director was because I had all these contacts at Rutgers, which would then enable Embrace Kids to go to the next level. So what I did immediately was start developing ties with the Greek organizations at Rutgers, of which I had been a part of. I was a chapter advisor to, and we started a program where we paired up a student group with a patient family. And then we were very clear with what the goal was. The goal was light social interaction. And then the purpose was to not solve real world problems. Embrace Kids can help pay bills. You have counselors and social workers that are credentialed to do that work. This was just to provide some light social interaction and a morale boost to the patient family, because healing comes from a lot of different places. For the whole family, you're trying to deal with issues such as loneliness, okay? When a child or any person goes through a difficult challenge, people tend to not know how to deal with that. It's awkward. People around them are unsure, and unfortunately, they pull away. It's particularly true with kids. So our approach was, well, let's wrap the patient families in incredible people and groups, part of making them feel like a hero and a champion, and again, providing support through like social interaction. So now we would have these large scale events, and it's a very appropriate way to bring college students into the mix. You're in the hospital atrium and it could fit 500 people, and that enables you to have college students come do activities with the kids, have some food, sit at a table with the parents. And so what we realized, there was tremendous potential in this idea of getting college students involved. And then that led to Rutgers Dance Marathon being the major fundraising drive and growth engine for Embrace Kids. 21 years ago, when I first became the director, Rutgers Dance Marathon was pretty modest. It was done in a multi-purpose room, and it raised $45,000 for Embrace Kids. Now, mind you, that was a lot back then because we were raising $400,000 a year. You do an event, now bumped it up by 10%. What we did year over year was work with the Rutgers students, their advisors, student life at Rutgers, to grow the total number of students and groups that were involved, pair them up with more and more families, and then create a self-replicating but really an increasing system of nice people to be around the families and to fundraise as participants in this dance marathon. It solved a problem that nonprofits always has, which is attrition. After a few years or 5 years, donors and volunteers, you lose them. Well, here with the university, there's always a new set of freshmen. And so then what we did was grow the number of student groups that were involved. It started with probably 15 or 20 Greek organizations. Today, we're at 85 student organizations. It's teams, it's clubs, it's professional organizations, it's the honors college. Rutgers is very diverse, so there's affinity groups, Southeast Asian Women's Organization, groups like that, and they were all brought into Embrace Kids. And so the idea was to keep growing the tent and keep bringing people underneath the tent to support the patient families, with keeping in mind that everybody could have a role. You might have fundraising by a college student. You might have them support in another way. Their parents or grandparents might get involved.
Yeah.
But by having these wonderful patient families connect with other good people, and we did do screening, good screening and education and follow-up for who's involved with our patient families. By bringing all those people together, it's so positive and appealing that then other people outside of the university community, businesses, they would want to get involved because they would just hear so many positive things about this community, about this dynamic that we created. And then the events were key for it, again, because it's a way to get hundreds of people together and in an appropriate way, in a public kind of
Yeah.
forum
Yeah.
where the parents could watch who their kids are interacting with.
And
And you
how
can
did the
take photos and
fundraising, yeah, how did it go from, so 45,000 in, let's say, 20 years ago? What are we talking about today from that event?
so today that Rutgers Dance Marathon raises $1 million a
Right.
year. It raised $1 million a
Not too
year
shabby.
for, yeah, the 2 or 3
Yeah.
years
And really,
before
like,
Dance Marathon.
what it makes me think of is this, we talk a lot about, like, well, 1 degree impact is the idea of, like, how do you create these 1 degree of separation connections, but really through by way of this, like, relationship flywheel, right? Like, how do you create really meaningful relationships that by the way that you design them and engage with people and bring them into your community, it kind of creates this groundswell that, like, exponentially grows over time. And it's like you guys created that also, like, the byproduct of that was this, like, fundraising flywheel, right? Like, it just by nature of very naturally, instead of being this robotic, like, don't forget to check in with this person, you just created a really natural organic community that grew and drove value for not only the program, but also for the fundraising side. I'd be curious, how much of that, it's always easy to tell a story in hindsight and make it sound like it was very much by design, but how much of the 20 years of this partnership and kind of growing the organization through this partnership with Rutgers was by design or the key to innovation, I think, is the freedom to fail and test and try, and things don't always work. And then you can keep going. Like, how much of it was, like, through trial and tribulation and the ability to fail versus, like, you knew the whole time, like, it was going to work and this is what was going to happen?
So I did know that it was going to work. And with pediatrics, you have to really limit failure because you're dealing with kids. Okay. So you have to be so much more cautious and well thought out. So I don't feel like we took a lot of risks. When I first set up this program, pairing up student groups with patient families, there was a lot of naysayers. Okay. There was naysayers all around about college students, not being the right demographic, not conducting themselves right. And from the first day, I had this approach that no person and no student group is all one thing. People have different sides to them. And what we were going to do was create a culture where we got the best part of a college student or a student group. Okay. So by focusing on the mission, the right messaging, training, follow up, we were able to develop students and student groups that could come through for us for this. So I really struggle sometimes to answer the what did you fail at? I don't have a good answer for that, including with what you just asked me. And listen, I guess it could have failed in that the dynamics, the connections between the groups or people might not have worked. That might have been the fail. But we knew that wasn't the case because when we brought individual students to the Children's Hospital, everybody loved it. The kids loved it, the parents loved it, the nurses loved it, and the college students loved it. So now it was just a matter of creating a system that could be sustained and that was compliant. When you're dealing with kids, any kids but sick kids, compliance is heavy. So what I will say the challenge was how exhausting it is to run college programming college programming for kids, in that you have to be on top of everything at all times. I'm a morning person, college students are evening. It was exhausting all day long, staying on top of everything. It paid off. You have to have standards, rules, procedures for college students in groups, and you could never waver. So I'm going to give you a real life example of one that was tough for people to follow. There was no texting allowed between college students and patient families. Everything needed to be done by email. Why? Well, when you write an email, it's a little different mentality than we all text our friends or sister or buddy or send memes, right? So the idea was that you sit down and you treat it more as a responsibility, but also that email can be controlled by the recipient. If I just text you, you might be up at midnight and get it, or I might wake you up, or when I get up at 5 a.m., I might wake you up. So for email, it's deliberate, whether you check it or not. So there was no texting allowed at all, no exceptions. It was a challenge to keep that in place. And actually, the biggest challenge was with the parents of the kids. The college students followed what we expected of them. It's more like the parents would say, oh, I don't check my email that often. Could you text me? No, it's the Embrace Kids rule. Absolutely no texting. And you had to just stay on top of that. Social media, same thing. College students could not be social media friends or contacts with any minors, nor could they communicate with minors. Zero exceptions. Well, but, Lacey's mom said we could be, no, zero exception. And when I tell you, we worked on these things every single day. And again, the challenges came more from the patient families.
Yeah.
It really wasn't from the college students. Now, with college students, I'd say attire was sometimes a challenge. Children's hospital, pediatric clinic, and college students, sometimes are wearing attire. It's not quite appropriate for that. But we followed these things with like a zero flexibility. The first time something came up, it was addressed within that hour. So
it sounds like there it was more of an intuition. Like you went in with a very strong intuition of a solve because of a deep understanding of these two communities, these two populations, and how they could drive value, and then use processes and rules and regulations and different things, both again based on what you knew of the programming side, like that needed to be followed just to like be able to engage with these kids at all because of the unique situation, and like paired those two things together and then just stayed diligently on top of it to make sure until it became a cultural, like now it probably today is less, I would imagine, is less of a thing, as in the beginning, you probably had to be really on top of it until it became a part of the culture that people would get like kind of onboarded onto.
Yes, but then the challenge would be every September, there'd be a new crew. This program had liaisons, new students would come into the organization. So it was each fall, September would be exhausting for so many reasons with a university. There's the training. We'd have to do training for 85 student organizations. They had to do paperwork, just the follow-up. And then I'd say by mid to late October, everything was gelled. But it's just exhausting. And again, because of the schedule. Oh, well, could you come speak at our student group meeting at 9 p.m.? Glenn's asleep.
You're like,
just about asleep.
I'm up at 5 a.m. So I am sleeping at 9 p.m.
Yeah. So those were some of the challenges, but What I want to tell the audience now, after many years of working with college students and having them visit a children's hospital and a pediatric oncology clinic, there was never one significant complaint about the students.
That's incredible.
Not one.
Yeah.
There was very small things that came up, like the attire. It's kind of small. We had some challenges with the parents or patient, more of the parents not following to the letter. But even then, there was no significant complaint. And so
Yeah.
those naysayers that I mentioned previously, and a lot of them I still know and see, I would always get a little smile when I would see the naysayers on our medical campus, because now this is the gem that everybody wants.
Yeah.
Imagine having this fundraising engine and volunteers and events and positive energy and press and social media. It's the envy of a lot of people. And I've actually had people either on the medical campus or the university, hey, how could we do this? How could we replicate this? And I'd say it's intensive and it's relationship based. You have to put so much time into the relationships in order to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's the thing, is it's like not a quick overnight. It's not a like, oh, we want this. It's something that you have to invest in. I would be curious to hear how over the years, so one would be like, how do you measure impact? And then how has that measurement evolved over the years?
Sure. So impact of measurement, certainly there's financial piece to it, total dollars of financial aid, how many patient families were helped. But then there's the indirect part, volunteers, total number of volunteers, total volunteer hours, because what I've just explained to you, that this program about engaging college students, with patient families, there's no financial piece to that to measure. But yet you think about the value. What is the value? And you try to put measurements to these things. It's not always so easy, because it's really not just a volunteer hour. It's that you've given a family a relationship with people that they trust. So the measurement on that part was always challenging for us.
Yeah.
But I would do it per hour, per student, per group. And then what I could say indirectly was there was a correlation, to the total fundraising of Dance Marathon. So you had all this volunteer activity and you had Dance Marathon, both increased along a very predictable, similar curve.
That's interesting. And then as far as separate from the partnership with the colleges, how you mentioned like total dollars of financial assistance for families. And then what other things, as it relates just specifically to programming, separate from that relationship with Rutgers, what are you guys keeping an eye on always to make sure that the programming you're delivering is driving the most impact for the families and patients?
Sure. So I'd say about 15 years ago, Embrace Kids did make a small modification to our mission statement that we could periodically support research and or make major gifts to the Children's Hospital and the Cancer Center. We did that because we realized that you want to have the best medical program possible while doing these robust non-medical support programs. So what we would do is take a look at what the medical campus was missing via feedback from families, staff, and then periodically Embrace Kids would make a major commitment to the Children's Hospital or Cancer Center. More often for programming. Research is obviously done by a very specific type of person, but programming that could be offered by the medical institutions in partnership with Embrace Kids. And so these would be programs every couple years. Embrace Kids would make a million, 1.5 million, or $2 million commitment to fund a special new program that we knew was really important. So that was another way that we were constantly reviewing everything that was going on with our patient family. So I'll give you an example of one. This is probably the thing that I have the most pride about for my 21-year career and commitment with Embrace Kids. It's end of life care for kids in the home. That's called palliative care. Palliative care is a very tough topic in general, particularly when it relates to kids, because it's so unnatural that kids pass young. It's something that people, including donors, have a hard time hearing and connecting with. Okay. So if you talk about providing gifts or trips or parties, it's pretty easy to talk to any person about those things from a donor, volunteer, or just general perspective. When you start getting into end of life, it's tough. It's tough to fundraise for it. It's tough to have an audience for it, but it's inherent in pediatric oncology, hematology. And so what I did was create good communication so I could connect with everyday people about this topic and just try to give a layperson's explanation, say things such as, well, we shouldn't abandon families at their darkest moment. Here we helped them in so many ways. In the end, the child fell to their healthcare battle. That's when we should be stepping in with special, extraordinary resources. So our palliative care program was a partnership with the Children's Hospital. The same nurses that took care of the kids on the floor for months or years were now able to be in the home.
Oh, wow.
With the family.
That's amazing.
While the child was going through end of life. Mm. So you're now giving them continuity of care, but with the people. Pediatrics is all about people. And so the visiting nurse type person that might come take care of our grandparents is not the best person to take care of a little one. Okay. More often than not, the families might pass on the visiting nurse because it's a stranger, and sometimes there's a rotation. So what we did, Embrace Kids funded the program and then provided political, financial support, leadership, and then the Children's Hospital provided the staff and the equipment. And what we did was we would go in and provide the best option possible for the worst case scenario. Yeah,
that's wonderful. All right, so we have 2 minutes left, and I knew we would have too much good stuff to talk about, and this is like such an important thing. So we're gonna have to do a second round of this because this is a very important topic in the nonprofit, in ND industry in general, in life. But if you, again, with our 2 minutes left, if you could touch on succession planning. So obviously you kind of knew at some point that you were going to transition on to the next phase of your career. You've brought on an incredible, kind of your second in command, Armand, to take over that role in, as short a blurb as possible. And then we'll have to do a follow-up to this conversation, just talk about like what that process was like to make sure that Embrace Kids not just sustained and lived on, but that it continued to grow and be as successful as you were able to make it.
Right. I want Embrace Kids to continue to thrive. That's one of my favorite words, is thrive. And so for a good succession plan for nonprofit, you need to do it in advance. If you're a leader that's really been committed and been with the group for a while, I was all those things, you need to start thinking about this months or years in advance. And that was what I did. You need to be thoughtful. You need to think about what your own exit as leadership is going to do to everybody in your community. That weighed on me really heavy. And so I knew for myself who I am as a person and leader, that I needed to come up with the strongest succession plan possible. So for me, I'm particularly type A, years in advance. I was thinking about this, that meant looking for the right candidate. So I couldn't even think about starting this process for myself until I identified a candidate. And that candidate was part of Embrace Kids, was known to people, tested, trusted. Once that general endorsement from the community was there, then I could get to the specifics, skills, experience, relationships, putting all of those things in place so that this person that was accepted, endorsed in a general way would then specifically be ready to take on this role. These were my priorities. I know not every nonprofit leader is necessarily going to think about things, think about these things in advance. That's just what I wanted and needed to do in life. I always self-actualize. I do what I want to and or need to. And so this was part of that self-actualization process, doing it at the highest level.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all of this. It's, I mean, so many important, insightful, bits of information in here, and for all the work that you've done in this space for, 20 plus years. If people want to get in touch with you or Embrace Kids, what would be the best way for the audience to connect?
My email address, which is Glenn with 2 N's at embracekids.org. So
awesome.
You can email me anytime. If I can be helpful on these matters, succession, university involvement, students, grand events, I would be there. So
thank you. Well, Glenn, I very much appreciate it, and look forward to our continued conversations and partnership.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me on.
All right. Bye-bye.